I live in the American Gardens building on West 81st Street, on the 11th floor. My name is Patrick Bateman. I believe in taking care of myself. After I remove the ice pack, I use a deep pore cleanser lotion. In the shower, I use a water-activated gel cleanser. I always use an aftershave lotion with little or no alcohol, because alcohol dries your face out. Then an anti-aging eye balm followed by a final moisturizing protective lotion.
Is that what I think it is? Is that YSL Pour Homme? There's a few. Oh, is that Caron Pour Homme? Wow, I'm not going to blind buy those. That would be totally stupid. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Sense for Thought. I'm Mo, and today I want to analyze and talk about one of my favorite movies and favorite books, American Psycho. And I want to talk about specifically how perfume is used as a symbol, a status symbol, to depict certain images. I also want to talk about why in the book, Patrick Bateman's signature scent is Paul Sebastian Fine Cologne, and why in the movie he wears YSL Pour Homme as his signature scent, and Caron Pour Homme, he only has one bottle of that, whilst he has 3 in the cabinet, so this must be his date night murder perfume. Let's talk about it. So before we talk about these perfumes in particular, I think it's important for us to set the scene about who the American Psycho is. That is, of course, Patrick Bateman, the main protagonist in the book and in the movie. And he is a VP of an investment banking firm in Wall Street in New York in the late 80s. On the outside, he is desperate to fit in. He is very materialistic, very narcissistic, and wants to appear perfect and to fit in with his peers, slightly one-upping them. However, beneath all of that, he is, of course, completely psychotic. He has zero emotions, feelings, human connections, and empathy, and he is a murderer, cannibal, amongst other things. So the way this video will work, I'll firstly introduce you to the character Patrick Bateman and what we learn about him in the movie and in the textbook, and then we will discuss these perfumes, all 3 of them, the 2 signature scents, and of course the date night / murder night perfume. We will then discuss whether these choices were intentional and they're a good fit. And to round off the video, I'll be using my powers as a fragrance nerd to recommend Patrick Bateman some perfumes if the movie was set in 2025 or 2026 by the time you're watching this. We will recommend a signature, and we will recommend a date night / murder night perfume for him if the movie was set this year. So without further ado, let's get started. So it's really important for me to tell you my take on the character before we begin. So Patrick Bateman is depicted in many scenes as a super materialistic, competitive guy who has no real substance behind the mask that he puts on in public. And to be honest, to be a VP in an investment bank in Wall Street, it's pretty cutthroat business. So I understand why people in these kind of work backgrounds, these super toxic workplaces, end up being like that. Matter of fact, I know a few people in 2025 in the real world. Yeah, they're not murderers. Yeah, they're not cannibals or psychos, but they work in these kind of jobs. And they do have a little bit of Patrick Bateman about them. So what does YSL Pour Homme smell like? This is, of course, a vintage bottle. We had to get it as accurate as possible. Let's give it a spray. Pretty good atomizer, I have to say. So YSL Pour Homme, as a scent profile, it's one of those typical 80s perfumes. I think it was released in the 70s, actually. And it has that thing, right? There's 2 main factors that I want to describe to you. Firstly, it has a huge lemon note in the opening, which I really despise. It smells like a pickled lemon. All my Middle Eastern guys, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And once that lemon note dissipates, you have a very classical fougere from the time. Just a classic barbershop scent with some aromatic touches. And the perfumes from this era, they had cleanliness and dirtiness in different ratio. Modern perfumes, they're just 100% clean, completely crazy clean. You have perfumes where the dirtiness kind of was a bit higher than the cleanliness, stuff like Kuros, etc. But this one, it still has some dirtiness. It's not as dirty as Kuros, but it's soapy and dirty at the same time. just like a vintage masculine. Now, YSL Pour Homme was never really the main player. It was never really super mainstream, and I think it's a super interesting choice. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at it and compare it to his signature scent in the book. So Patrick Bateman is a very shallow person. It's made quite clear in the movie by not just the fact that he has the most ridiculous morning routine of all times, but also how he is name-dropping brands with his Valentino suit all over people's glasses. And of course, let's not forget that reservation at Dorsia. In the book, it is made even more obvious and ludicrous. And there are many, many perfume mentions in here. And they do tell a lot about Patrick Bateman. So Patrick Bateman, most of the book, he's actually insulting other people's perfumes. So he says that Louise has terrible taste in cologne and Louise wears Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, so that's an insult there. There's also a part of the book where he's in a boardroom meeting with his colleagues and he describes the mixture of all of their colognes and he name drops them as a cold, sickening perfume. And he name drops quite a few popular perfumes from the 80s. So he name drops Antaeus, he name drops Polo Green, he name drops Obsession. So he name drops quite a few in that excerpt. But there's one mention in the book where he mentions his perfume when he is going on a date with Evelyn, his girlfriend. And Evelyn says, "What are you wearing? Obsession? You party pooper, is it Obsession?" Now, that's quite key because he insults Obsession as part of all the other popular choices in the boardroom that his colleagues are all wearing. And then he says, "No, Paul Sebastian." So he shares that it's Paul Sebastian, and Evelyn answers as if she knows what he's talking about, which, let's be real, she doesn't. She says, "Of course." So why the hell is he insulting all of his other colleagues' perfumes, which are infinitely more popular than Paul Sebastian? Paul Sebastian is actually quite a dated choice at that time. It's really not popular. And basically, it's because he is trying to be different and trying to be a little bit of a hipster. But he really is failing because he has zero personality. This is all not his taste, it's just a persona that he's putting on. So he chose Paul Sebastian just to flex that no one else is wearing it. But actually, what does Paul Sebastian smell like? Let's give it a spray. Wow, one of the worst atomizers in history. So Paul Sebastian, a fine cologne. Now this one is a very basic, musky, vintage lavender cologne style perfume. Okay, it's really nothing exciting. And the reason he chose this and the reason he's insulting others is very, very typical of his character because he wants to appear different. But actually, this does not smell different at all. It's just less popular. But it's not exactly the hipster's choice. It's the fake wannabe hipster's choice. I have to be honest, I prefer Paul Sebastian than YSL Pour Homme, because it doesn't have that annoying lemon. And this is super clean. It's not as dirty. But yet again, this is a more modern batch. So who knows, maybe the old one was super dirty. But these two really achieve the same job as to why they were chosen. They are classy. They are elegant. They are understated. They're not shouty, like stuff like Antaeus, Polo Green, Kouros of the time, two of which he insults that his colleagues wear. And that is typical behavior of a tasteless hipster, where he's like, I'm going to be different. Remember, Patrick Bateman is not trying to shout and scream because he is trying to blend in. And these two perfumes really highlight that, yeah, if you are in the 80s and you're trying to blend in and be boring but slightly different, it's like different shades of beige. And this is definitely the fake hipster's choice. I think the fact that Patrick Bateman chose a cologne that doesn't push the boundary and can easily be mistaken for any other cologne in the 80s, but is the hipster's choice or is different and unpopular enough and slightly more understated than the obvious choices, is definitely just a way for him to flex when people guess his cologne wrong, like Evelyn did and said, "Are you wearing Obsession?" And he said, "No, it's Paul Sebastian." That's just him trying to say, look, I know something that you don't, and you don't have this knowledge, so I'm cooler than you, you know? It's like the rich people when they flex over where they went on holiday and which ski resort they went to. This is that kind of flex where it's not an obvious flex, but it is a flex that he just knows something that you don't, and it's just slightly a little bit of a power play on his part. So Paul Sebastian, of course, in today's day and age is dated. In the 80s, I believe it was also slightly dated at the time. It smells clean, it smells aromatic, well put together, quite understated and elegant. It smells like it would blend in the boardroom and not bring too much attention, which of course in Patrick Bateman's lifestyle on the side, his little side hobby of murdering people, that is very beneficial. The book continuously and relentlessly mentions brand names just to show the amount of flexing that Patrick does. Now, because the movie can't really bring all those brand names to life because it would be totally ludicrous, it opts for showing it on screen, and it goes for YSL Pour Homme. Now, YSL is very much like Paul Sebastian in the fact that it's posh and it's elegant, and of course YSL Pour Homme in the 80s is expensive, so it can compete alongside all of the typical ones that are mentioned in the book: Obsession, Antaeus, Polo Green, you name it, Paco Rabanne, Pour Homme, Grey Flannel, all of them. But the fact that they chose YSL Pour Homme is quite genius, because it is basically the designer brand version of Paul Sebastian Fine Cologne, where it's not the most popular one, and it will allow Patrick to also do the same slight power flex when someone calls him out and say, what is that cologne? Is it, I don't know, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme? He'll be like, no, it's YSL Pour Homme. This is as unpopular, I would say, as Paul Sebastian. They don't necessarily smell the same, but to be honest with you, a lot of these perfumes smell quite similar. And now for my favorite of Patrick's perfume choices, Caron Pour Homme. I have this vintage mini, which I'm really, really happy that I have. Let's put some of this on, shall we? So what does Caron Pour Homme smell like? I know exactly what this smells like, guys, but let's put some on anyway. Little splash, little splash. Just a little splash there. Oh, Caron Pour Homme, oh my goodness, what a perfume this is. This is essentially lavender and vanilla. It is so elegant, it is so classy, it is so masculine. It is a level above YSL Pour Homme and Paul Sebastian, and it makes sense as a date night 80s frag for sure because of that sweet vanilla. And that tonka comes out in that barbershop-y kind of DNA, and that beautiful French lavender. This smells amazing, and it makes sense that Patrick puts this on and he's in a total flow state as he is chopping people's heads off. Caron Pour Homme really whispers refinement and control, and it suits Patrick Bateman the most because he's not messy or sloppy in his masculinity. He's not loud in his violence. He keeps things quite well controlled and under wraps until the end of the movie anyway. It's very controlled, aesthetic, elegant. You could even almost describe it as delicate. And of course, now we have to mention the elephant in the room, that business card scene, which is essentially the entire thesis of the movie in one scene. If I could summarize it in one scene, it is that scene exactly, where these guys are there comparing business cards. They all look the same. They have the same glasses. Oliver Peoples, they wear the same Valentino suit, they have the same haircut, they have the same job. Everything about them is the same, yet they're there competing. They're obsessing over microscopic differences, like the font in their business card, the texture of the business card, and of course the different shades of white and beige that they could possibly choose. They're trying to appear individual, but within very, very strict boundaries, and it's totally ridiculous and ludicrous. And you know what it reminds me of? You know, obsessing over minute details. We see it all the times, even in Fragcom, where people are obsessing over batch variation, where they have the subtle flex of, oh, I have the old presentation of something, or oh, I have an 87 and it's got a little bit more oak moss than your 95 bottle. It's like, really, guys? It's all the same shit. Now, I have to bring up the sense of the 80s when discussing these perfumes. The perfumes of the 80s are very dominant. Those masculine powerhouses, Polar Green, Obsession, Dracar Noir, Fahrenheit, Antaeus, and Kouros, of course. The movie and the book did not opt for any of those, even though they were mentioned as other colleagues are wearing them. It's because Patrick wants to conform. He does not want to attract too much unnecessary attention. He wants to flex a subtle taste. So that's why he goes for YSL Pour Homme and Paul Sebastian Fine Cologne. The brutality and horrors that he commits and crimes that he commits, you would expect someone to be wearing a powerhouse perfume. Okay, that would be a Kouros-like behavior. Okay, but instead, he likes to juxtapose it to hide behind this refined, tasteful man image that he has, and that's why he opts for something like YSL Pour Homme. Now, if American Psycho was set in the year 2026, what would the perfume choice be? Now, we know Patrick is a fake hipster and conformist by his music choice, where he feigns to be some kind of pseudo-intellectual about music, but actually is just nerding out on some pop stuff. And that shows that he only has a surface level knowledge. And why would a murderer who's trying to fit in and conform go for something super nerdy? Of course he's going to nerd out on the pop music culture because he just wants to fit in. He doesn't want to go too crazy or be too brash or create too much friction or attention to himself. And his perfume choices really, really match that. So if American Psycho was set in 2026, what perfumes would I recommend? It's important to say that whilst the perfumes will have different names than the ones in the 80s, and they'll have different scent profiles, the basis of choosing them will be the same. Where Patrick is trying to conform, he is kind of a fake hipster, or he's a hipster in a very confined, conformist way. So it would still be a common office style perfume, but it would be the least likely one of them. So I've done some market research and I've spoken to a few of my friends who work in London in these banking, sales, high pressure office jobs where it's a bunch of men in their 20s basically that are over competing with one another to show fake taste level and flexing. And by the way, what I do find alarming is a lot of them look to Patrick Bateman as some kind of icon, which is super weird. So the answers that I was given is essentially all the usual suspects that I was expecting. There is the Terre de Hermès, there is the Sauvage, there is the Bleu de Chanel, as you can imagine. There's a few other guys that wear slightly more out there stuff, like Portrait of a Lady, Reflection Man. These are the guys that are like, they go to Harrods and say, yo, recommend me something cool, rather than the guys that just go with the flow. Of course, there are the Baccarat Rouge 540 and Creed Aventus guys out in force, dominating the workspace. But what would Patrick Bateman do? I don't think he would go for Baccarat Rouge 540 or Aventus or Sauvage or any of those, because these are too typical, too predictable, and too normal. He is a hipster after all. Now, the low-hanging fruit, the easy and obvious choice is to go for something uber clean that you'd think a psycho would do it for their personality. But here's the thing. Yes, it would be cool for us to say he wears Ganymede or he wears Bois Imperial because they're so sterile and clean and lifeless. And that would make sense if Patrick had a personality and his personality was the murder. Actually, he doesn't have any personality at all. So he actually would choose something to conform rather than feed into his personality. But remember, Patrick is not trying to make a choice that feeds his taste because he has no taste. So he's not a psycho and he's like, this makes me feel good as a psycho. No, his choices are all about how he appears to others. And Bois Imperial and Ganymede would simply be a little bit lackluster. I think, personally, my choice, the hipster conformist choice, would definitely be Santal 33 by Le Labo, where it's not a blue scent, it's not the typical stuff, but every single person that I've seen that wears that is some kind of wannabe hipster that thinks they're a hipster, but they're really not a hipster at all, guys. Okay? So I think it would be Santal 33. My second choice for his day-to-day scent, I completely reject the notion that he would wear Bois Imperial because that's too cheap. Okay, remember, he has an image to uphold. It would either be Ganymede, which might be a bit too weird that it get people talking like, whoa, what is that smell? So I think my choices for his two signatures, his daytime signature would be Gentle Fluidity Silver, where it is sterile and weird, and it's still quite common, and it's still very Broxton heavy. So you can't really go wrong with that. And for his date night / murder night perfume, I think the most hipster perfume of this era is definitely Santal 33. And that one has a little bit more warmth than Gentle Fluidity Silver and would work better for those date nights and murder nights, kind of like Caron Pour on Homme. So to conclude, Perfume in American Psycho and in Patrick Bateman's life is not really about style or taste. It's about camouflage for Bateman, so that he just fits in because that's what he wants to do. Just like the business cards, just like the Valentino suits, and just like the Oliver Peoples glasses, it's just a way for him to fit in and not attract too much attention in his empty life. Now you're probably asking, let's see Paul Allen's perfume. Well, I think Paul Allen definitely wore YSL Kouros. There's no doubt about it. He is him. And that perfume is designed for him. The guy that everyone envies, because what the hell? Why do you smell like piss and soap at the same time? That's Paul Allen. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what Patrick Bateman would wear in 2025. But for now,
I have to return some videotapes.